Now we cross to Hong Kong for the latest from our Rise Asia business correspondent, Joe Flynn. Hi, Joel. Let's start with a roundup of Asian market action at the end of the week. What's been happening?
Yeah, well, to give you more detail on some of those things you just mentioned a moment ago, Idi, broadly speaking, Asian markets did round out the week in fairly positive fashion. Regional investors very much choosing to focus on words from the Fed rather than on China's economy. News that Beijing's top trade negotiator might visit Washington later this month also helped boost optimism today. That helped the Shanghai Composite in the Chinese mainland close up 0.7% for the session, adding 0.8% for the week. Blue chip stocks, meanwhile, were up 0.7 as well for the day, 1.2% for the week. Offshore here in Hong Kong, you mentioned gains edging just over 0.5% higher for the day, concluding 6 straight sessions of positive conclusions to the Hang Seng. That capped an excellent week here in Hong Kong for blue chip stocks. 3.5% rise on the benchmark offshore. In Japan, shares were up even more strongly for the session, overcoming falls by convenience stores who had reported dismal earnings in Tokyo today. The Nikkei added 1% for the session, 4.1% for the week. That is its biggest weekly gain in more than 2 months. South Korean stocks, meanwhile, neared a 1-month high. The benchmark Kospi jumped 3.2% for the week. Most Southeast Asian markets did also rise on that trade optimism. The Philippines, though, pulled back slightly on Friday after leading gains, rather, at the beginning of the week. Losses for some of the country's largest banks dragged the main index down today. Aussie shares, meanwhile, snapped a 4-day run. That was after they were dragged lower by miners. They were still up 3% for the week, though. So, as I said, a fairly good start, certainly for the year, as far as Asian markets are concerned.
Well, Joel, like you just mentioned, markets today eyeing the U.S. Fed more than Chinese economic data. And China's government doesn't seem overly concerned by these lower GDP rates. Why is that, Joel?
No, that's right. I mean, broader worries about the economy did, to an extent, weigh on sentiment somewhat. That's why rises perhaps weren't stronger. But frankly, news that China will set a lower economic growth target for this year isn't tremendously surprising, really, certainly as far as investors are concerned. There's already been a slew of data out over the last 6 to 12 months that has borne out some of those worries. So to some extent, the news today that this rate will be lower doesn't really bring anything new to the table. To other China watchers, though, it might be more surprising, certainly from a policy standpoint and a political one. Data later this month is expected to show the Chinese economy for 2018 grew about 6.6%. That is the weakest level of economic growth since 1990. If the forecast is lowered to 6 to 6.5%, as these reports suggest it will be for this year, that really points to the sort of worries that are going on at the top level of policymaking in Beijing. Interestingly, it does seem that attitudes there are turning more dovish at the same time as Fed policy might be. Certainly, Jerome Powell's comments over the last couple of weeks seem to be erring on the side of caution as far as that's concerned. Investors will very much be excited about what that could mean in terms of lower interest rates from the US and in terms of economic stimulus measures in China as well.
Well, Joel, in Japan, former Nissan boss Carlos Ghosn has been charged today with 2 more allegations. Now, it's been quite a week for him, hasn't it?
It certainly has been quite a week for Monsieur Ghosn. He was indicted today on, as you say, 2 new charges of financial misconduct. Those relate to activity that allegedly happened at Nissan in 2008 and between 2015 and 2017. Those are in addition, of course, to separate charges that he is currently facing about under-reporting his pay, along with one of his senior executives. We found out from a statement from his lawyer in Tokyo that those new charges were being added. The lawyer is applying for bail for Carlos Ghosn at the moment. He has, of course, been detained since he was arrested back in the middle of November. It is uncommon, though, for defendants who deny charges in Japan to get bail. He may well, as a result, be locked up until his trial, which it's thought could be as far as 6 months away. Earlier this week, Ghosn, of course, called these accusations against him meritless. He called them unsubstantiated. The whole trial, really, by all accounts, is and has been quite gripping so far. We are not even at the stage at which we could call it a trial yet. Clearly, it has a long way to go. The implications as well for Nissan and indeed for Renault, which Carlos Ghosn formerly headed up as well, could be huge. This is one that we are going to continue to have to pay close attention to, and frankly, it looks like it could be very interesting indeed, and something I'm sure you'll be watching in a film, no doubt, before long as well.
Oh gosh, Joe, well, we'll be keeping our eye on that story. Now, it's been quite a week for another company there in Hong Kong. Now, smartphone maker Xiaomi seems to have been hit quite hard on the stock market, only a week after Apple released warning about its smartphone sales as well. What's been happening, Joel?
Yeah, Xiaomi's difficulties this week haven't really made nearly as many waves as Apple's did. No surprise really there. But both companies are, to an extent, suffering for fairly similar reasons. Xiaomi, you might remember, Idia, made its stock market debut here in Hong Kong back in July to much fanfare. At one point, bankers were touting a market valuation of as much as $100 billion. This week, Xiaomi's market capitalization fell to less than a third of that. It is at an all-time low as far as its stock concerned at the moment. And that's broadly thanks to this grim outlook for smartphone demand in the Chinese mainland. That, of course, was flagged, as you say, by Apple last week and has been a big driver of a broader rout in smartphone makers, certainly in tech shares. We saw Samsung hit this week as well on concerns for the chip-making sector as well. The issue as far as Xiaomi is concerned is that about 90% of its total revenue depends on sales of phones and gadgets. The problem was compounded basically this week because it had a 6-month lockup period for initial investors, which expired, and they moved quite quickly to get rid of their shares, which prompted the stock price to fall to an all-time low. The company is now betting on internet services to try and take it forward. It is trying to diversify its product range and its offering. Some of those do suggest it should still concentrate on the phone market. It is having some decent success abroad, however, not least of which is in India, and that has seemingly convinced the firm to look to new markets in the Middle East and perhaps crucially in Africa as well. Xiaomi knows rival Huawei has had big success there. It sounds like it's betting that it might do as well.
Well, yeah, Huawei is really pushing into the Nigerian market, Joel. Now, we've also seen that there's been a date set for the first China-Africa Economic and Trade Expo this year. Joel, what more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's right. China's Assistant Minister of Commerce has this week confirmed that Changsha, which is the capital city of Hunan province, will be hosting this event. It will take place from June the 18th to June the 20th this year and will feature all the usual expo stuff, forums, investment promotions, business negotiations, that sort of thing. Interestingly, though, it will also see a signing ceremony for major economic and trade projects between China and Africa. That is, of course, on top of the establishment of a new mechanism for economic and trade cooperation between China and Africa. It only comes, of course, a week after Foreign Minister Wang Yi wrapped up his trip to the continent to about 4 countries there. And some have speculated, really, that 2019 could yet prove to be the year of convergence for China and Africa, specifically on things like the internet, infrastructure, e-commerce as well. One of the key aspects of what happens there, though, will be the relationship between Washington and Beijing. We know that both sides see Africa as a key policy focus for this year, so do keep your eyes peeled on what happens next in those trade talks. They could well be significant in terms of Belt and Road investments, in terms of what the US does next in Africa as well.
Well, Joel, I know the whole world is waiting to see how the trade talks unfold. Now, thank you so much for joining me today to discuss this. Arise Asia business correspondent there, Joel Flynn.